There's a quiet frustration most people carry, a feeling they rarely say out loud. They work hard. They try to be responsible. They do what they were told would lead to success. And yet, money slips through their fingers. Opportunities feel just out of reach, and the life they imagined stays imagined. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. The gap between the wealthy and everyone else isn't just about income. It's not even about intelligence. It's about patterns, invisible ones, because while most people chase money, the 1% build systems that make money chase them. In this audiobook, The 1% Rule, How the Rich Stay Rich Forever, you're not just going to hear ideas. You're going to rewire how you think about wealth itself. You will discover the silent rules that govern long-term success, the psychological habits that quietly separate those who keep wealth from those who lose it, and the small, almost invisible decisions that compound into extraordinary results. We will walk through 25 chapters together, from understanding the identity shift that changes everything, to mastering emotional control with money, to building systems that work for you while you sleep, to protecting wealth once you create it, to thinking in decades instead of days. And here's one line I want you to remember from the very beginning. Wealth is not built in moments of effort. It is built in patterns of behavior. This is not financial advice. This is awareness training. Because money, at its core, is not about numbers. It's about decisions. And decisions come from identity. Most people don't have a money problem. They have a pattern problem. And today, that begins to change. So as you listen, don't just hear the words. Measure yourself against them. Because by the end of this journey, you won't just understand how the rich stay rich. You will start thinking like someone who was never meant to be broke in the first place. And that leads us to the first shift, the one almost nobody talks about. Chapter 1. The Identity of the 1%. Before money changes, identity changes. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to increase income without upgrading the person managing it. And that's why even when they earn more, they don't keep more. Because the identity stayed the same. The 1% understand something subtle but powerful. They don't see themselves as people who have money. They see themselves as people who manage value. There's a difference, a massive one. When you see money as something you have, you protect it emotionally. You fear losing it. You hesitate to use it. You react to it. But when you see money as something you manage, you move differently. You direct it. You deploy it. You multiply it. Let me ask you something. When money enters your life, what happens next? Do you feel relief, excitement, the urge to spend? Or do you feel responsibility? Because the 1% feel responsibility first, not pressure, control. They understand that every dollar has a job, and if they don't assign that job, life will assign it for them, usually in the form of impulse. Here's where the identity shift deepens. Most people ask, how much can I spend? The 1% ask, what does this decision become in 5 years? Pause there, because that question alone can change your financial life forever. 5 years, not today, not this weekend, not this moment. 5 years. Because the wealthy are not reacting to the present. They are negotiating with the future, and the future always rewards discipline. There's a story you won't hear often. A young developer in Berlin, 2023. He started earning more than he ever had before. Remote work, global clients, fast money. Within a year, He upgraded everything, apartment, car, lifestyle. From the outside, it looked like success. From the inside, he felt trapped because his expenses grew faster than his identity. And eventually, his income couldn't keep up with the version of himself he had created. Now compare that to someone else, a woman in Singapore. Same timeline, same income jump, but different identity. She didn't change her life immediately. She studied her behavior first, tracked every dollar, built a system, delayed upgrades, not because she couldn't afford them, but because she understood something most people don't. Lifestyle is a trap when identity is not ready. 3 years later, the first person is still chasing stability. The second owns assets that pay her every month. Same opportunity, different identity. And that's the 1% rule at its core. Not what you earn, but who you are when you earn it. So here's a quiet challenge for you. If nothing about your income changed, but everything about your identity did, what would you do differently tomorrow? Would you spend the same way, think the same way, react the same way, or would you pause more, plan more, move with intention instead of emotion? Because that's the beginning, the shift from reacting to designing. And once that shift happens, money stops controlling you. You start controlling it. Now, here's the part most people avoid. Identity change is uncomfortable because it forces you to confront your habits, your impulses, your patterns, your excuses. It asks you to stop saying, "This is just how I am," and start asking, "Who do I need to become?" That question is everything, because wealth is not attracted to need. It is attracted to alignment, and alignment begins with identity. So before we talk about strategies, investments, or systems, you need to understand this. If you don't become someone who can hold wealth, you will always find a way to lose it, not intentionally, but predictably, because patterns repeat, unless they are broken. And that brings us to the next chapter, where we expose the invisible cycle that keeps people stuck, even when they're trying to move forward. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Dear friends, we've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2. The invisible cycle that keeps you broke. There is a loop, quiet, predictable, and almost invisible. Most people live inside it their entire lives without ever realizing it exists. It looks normal. It feels justified. It even feels responsible. But it is the very thing that keeps them stuck. Here's how it works. You earn money, you feel relief, you spend to reward yourself, you return to zero, and then you repeat. Again, and again, and again. At first, it doesn't feel like a problem because the amounts are small. A purchase here, a reward there. You deserve this moment after a hard week. But over time, something dangerous happens. Your spending becomes emotional. And once money becomes emotional, it becomes uncontrollable. This is what most people never understand. They think their financial situation is logical, but it's not. It's emotional. They spend when they're stressed. They save when they're scared. They invest when they're excited. And that cycle keeps resetting their progress. Now listen carefully. The 1% don't eliminate emotion. They master it. That's the difference. Because money is not just math. It's behavior. And behavior is driven by emotion. So if you don't control your emotional patterns, your financial patterns will control you. Let me show you something simple but powerful. Imagine two people. Both earn the same income, both have the same opportunities, but one of them reacts emotionally and the other responds intentionally. The first person gets paid. They feel relief. They spend a little, then a little more, because it feels good, because it feels like progress, because it feels like they finally made it. But what they actually did was reset their progress. The second person gets paid. They feel the same emotions, relief, excitement, but they pause. They don't suppress the feeling. They delay the reaction. And in that delay, they take control. Because here's the truth most people avoid. You don't lose money when you spend it. You lose money when you spend it without intention. That's the cycle. Not earning too little, but reacting too quickly. And this is where the 1% quietly separate themselves. They build space between feeling and action. That space is power, because in that space, they ask better questions. Not, what do I want right now, but what does this decision do to my future? That question alone breaks the cycle. But most people never ask it, because they are moving too fast, too reactive, too conditioned. Now let's go deeper. Why does this cycle exist? Because most people were never taught how to think about money. They were taught how to earn it, how to spend it, how to survive with it, but never how to manage their relationship with it. So they grow up associating money with relief, and relief becomes the goal. Not growth, not control, not freedom, just relief. And when relief is the goal, you will always spend the moment you feel it, because you think that's the reward. But the 1% see it differently. They don't use money to feel better. They use money to build better systems. And that's a completely different mindset. Let me give you a real-world shift. Instead of thinking, I worked hard, I deserve to spend this, they think, I worked hard, this deserves a purpose. Do you hear the difference? One leads to consumption. The other leads to creation. And that shift is where wealth begins. Now here's something uncomfortable, but necessary. The cycle doesn't just show up in big decisions. It shows up in small ones, daily ones, the subscriptions you forgot about, the impulse buys, the it's just a little moments. Because wealth is not destroyed in one decision. It's eroded in patterns, quietly, gradually, predictably, like drops of water carving through stone. And most people don't notice it until years have passed, until they look back and realize they've been moving, but not progressing. That's the cycle. Movement without direction, effort without intention. Now, here's where it gets powerful. Once you see the cycle, you can break it. And breaking it doesn't require more income. It requires more awareness. Because awareness creates interruption, and interruption creates change. So the next time money enters your life, pause just for a moment. Feel the emotion, but don't act on it immediately. Ask yourself, what does my future need more than my present wants? That question is your exit, your way out of the loop. And the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. Until one day, you realize something has changed. You're no longer reacting, you're directing. And that's when the game shifts, because once you break the cycle, you don't just keep money. You start building something that lasts. But there's another layer, something even deeper. That determines whether you move forward or fall back into old patterns. And it has nothing to do with money itself. It has everything to do with how you see control. Chapter 3. Control is the real currency. Most people think money is power, but that's not true. Money, without control disappears, and control without money can still build it. That's why the 1% don't chase money first. They build control first, because control is the only thing that determines whether money stays or vanishes. Let's slow this down. Think about the last time money entered your life, a salary, a bonus, a payment. What happened next? Did you already know where it would go, or did you figure it out as you went? Because that difference is everything. The 1% don't guess with money. They decide in advance, before the money arrives, because they understand a simple truth. If you don't tell money where to go, it will follow your habits, and your habits will take it back to where you started. That's why so many people feel stuck. They're not lacking income. They're lacking structure, and without structure, even high income turns into high expenses. You've seen it before. People earning more, but saving less. Living better, but feeling worse. Because their lifestyle expanded faster than their control. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Control requires honesty, not the kind you show other people, the kind you show yourself. It asks you to look at your patterns without excuses, to admit where your money actually goes, to stop guessing and start tracking. Because what you don't measure, you cannot improve. And the 1% measure everything, not obsessively, but intentionally. They know where their money flows. They know what's working. They know what's leaking. And most importantly, they know what needs to change. Let me give you a simple image. Imagine your financial life as a container. Most people try to pour more money into it without noticing the holes at the bottom. So no matter how much they earn, it keeps leaking out. And they think the solution is more income, but the real solution is fixing the container. That's control. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, how can I make more? Start asking, how can I manage better? Because the person who manages well will always outperform the person who only earns more. This is where the 1% quietly win. They don't just focus on earning. They focus on directing. Every dollar has a destination. Every decision has a reason. Nothing is random. Nothing is reactive. And that's why their wealth compounds. Because it's not being pulled in 1,000 directions. It's being guided. Now let's talk about something most people avoid. Discipline, not the loud kind, not the wake up at 5 a.m. kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up in small decisions, daily ones, the decision not to spend, the decision to delay, the decision to stick to a plan, even when emotions say otherwise. That's real discipline, and that's what builds control. Because control is not built in big moments. It's built in consistent ones, the small choices that nobody sees, but that shape everything. Here's a truth that might challenge you. You don't need more opportunities. You need fewer uncontrolled decisions, because every uncontrolled decision creates friction in your future. It makes progress harder. It slows momentum. It keeps you in the same place, just with more effort. But when you build control, everything changes. Progress becomes smoother. Decisions become clearer. And money starts working with you instead of against you. Now let's take this deeper. Control is not about restriction. It's about direction. It's not about saying no to everything. It's about saying yes with intention. Because the 1% still spend. They still enjoy. They still live. But they do it consciously, not impulsively. They don't ask, can I afford this? They ask, does this align with where I'm going? And that question filters everything, Because when your decisions align with your direction, you stop wasting energy. You stop second-guessing. You stop feeling regret. And that creates something powerful. Confidence. Not loud confidence, quiet certainty. The kind that comes from knowing you are in control. Now here's the part most people don't expect. Control is not just about money, it's about identity. Because when you control your money, you start to control your behavior. When you control your behavior, you start to control your outcomes. And when you control your outcomes, you start to shape your life. That's the real power, not money itself. But what it represents: choice, freedom, direction. So let me ask you something. Right now, are you directing your money, or is your money directing you? Because the answer to that question will tell you exactly where you're headed. And if you don't like the direction, that's okay. Because control can be built one decision at a time, one pattern at a time, one moment of awareness at a time. But you have to choose it. No one can do it for you. No system will force it on you. It starts with you, with a decision, a quiet one, but a powerful one. I will take control. And once you make that decision, everything begins to shift. But control alone is not enough. Because once you gain control, you face a new challenge, one that quietly destroys more wealth than lack of income ever could. It's not about earning, it's not about spending, it's about something far more dangerous and far more subtle, the inability to wait. And that's where we go next. Chapter 4, The Cost of Impatience. There is a silent force that destroys more wealth than bad decisions ever could. It doesn't look dangerous. In fact, it feels natural. It feels justified. It even feels necessary. But it is one of the most expensive habits you will ever carry. Impatience. Not the loud kind, not the obvious kind, the quiet kind, the kind that whispers, "Why wait? Why not now?" You've earned it. And most people listen, not because they're careless, but because they've been trained to expect speed, fast results, fast money, fast progress. Everything around you is built for immediacy. You click, you get, you want, you have, you think, you act. And slowly, without realizing it, your mind begins to reject delay. But here's the truth. The 1% understand deeply. Wealth grows slowly or it disappears quickly. There is no middle ground. Let that settle. Because this is where most people lose, not because they don't know what to do, but because they don't wait long enough to see it work. They invest, then panic. They save, then withdraw. They plan, then abandon. Why? Because they expected results faster than reality delivers. And impatience resets everything. Now imagine this. Two people start at the same point. Same income, same opportunity. The first person builds a habit. They save consistently. They invest carefully. They stick to the plan. But after a few months, nothing dramatic happens. No big breakthrough, no sudden wealth. So they stop, because it doesn't feel like progress. The second person does the exact same thing, but when nothing happens, they continue, not because they're more motivated, but because they understand something different. They understand time, and time is the most underestimated force in wealth creation, because time does something most people can't see. It compounds, not just money, but behavior. And that's where the 1% win. They don't rely on intensity. They rely on consistency over time. While others are looking for quick wins, they are quietly building long-term results. Now here's the part that changes everything. Compounding is invisible at first. That's why people quit. Because in the beginning, it feels like nothing is happening. Small gains, slow progress, minimal change. But beneath the surface, something is building. And once it reaches a certain point, it accelerates rapidly. But most people never get there because they stop too early. They interrupt the process. They trade long-term growth for short-term satisfaction. And that trade is one of the most expensive decisions you can make. Now think about your own patterns. How often have you started something and stopped before it had time to work? A habit, a plan, a strategy. Not because it failed, but because it was slow. That's impatience, and it's costing you more than you realize. Because every time you stop, you don't just lose progress, you lose momentum. And momentum is everything. The 1% protect momentum at all costs. They don't jump from idea to idea. They don't chase trends. They commit, and then they stay. Long enough to see results, long enough to benefit from compounding, long enough to win. Now here's something deeper. Impatience is not just about time. It's about emotion. It's the discomfort of waiting, the urge to feel progress immediately, the need to see results now. And if you can't handle that discomfort, you will always interrupt your own growth. That's why the 1% trains something most people ignore: emotional endurance, the ability to stay steady, even when results are slow, the ability to trust the process, even when it feels uncertain, the ability to wait without losing focus. Because waiting is not passive. It's active discipline. It's choosing long-term over short-term. It's choosing growth over comfort. It's choosing future over present. And that choice separates those who build wealth from those who chase it. Now let me give you a simple shift. Instead of asking, how fast can I get results? Start asking, how long can I stay consistent? Because the answer to that question determines everything. The longer you stay consistent, the more compounding works in your favor. The more momentum builds, the more your results accelerate, until one day, what once felt slow feels unstoppable. But you have to get there. You have to stay long enough. Now here's the challenge. We live in a world that rewards speed, but wealth rewards patience. And those two forces are always in conflict. So every day, you are making a choice, consciously or unconsciously, speed or sustainability, immediate satisfaction or long-term growth. And the 1%, they choose growth again and again and again. Even when it's hard, even when it's slow, even when no one else sees it. Because they know something you're starting to understand now. The longer you can delay gratification, the faster your life accelerates later. That's the paradox. And once you accept it, everything changes. Your decisions slow down. Your thinking sharpens. Your behavior stabilizes. And your results start to compound. But patience alone is not enough. Because once you learn to wait, you face another challenge, one that quietly determines whether your patience pays off or gets wasted. It's not about time. It's about direction. Because waiting without direction is just delay. And that's where we go next. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 5, Direction Before Speed. There is something even more dangerous than impatience. It's moving fast in the wrong direction because speed feels like progress. It gives you the illusion that you're doing something, that you're getting somewhere, that you're improving. But movement without direction is just noise. And most people live in that noise. They stay busy, they stay active, they stay distracted, but they don't move forward. Not really, because they never stop long enough to decide where they're actually going. Now, listen carefully. The 1% are not obsessed with speed, they are obsessed with direction, because they understand something most people overlook. The right direction makes even slow progress powerful. The wrong direction makes fast progress useless. That's the difference. That's why some people work for years and still feel stuck, while others move slowly but build something that lasts. Direction. So let's pause for a moment. Right now, if everything you're doing continued for the next 5 years, where would it take you? Not where you hope, not where you imagine. Where would it actually lead? Because your habits already know the answer. Your daily actions are already pointing somewhere. The question is that direction intentional or accidental? Because most people don't choose their direction. They inherit it from their environment, from their habits, from their past. They wake up, react to the day, make decisions based on emotion, and call it living. But it's not. It's drifting. And drifting feels safe because it requires no resistance, no decision, no discomfort. But drifting always has a cost. It takes you somewhere, whether you choose it or not. Now the 1% do something different. They interrupt the drift. They step back. They observe. And then they decide, not once, but continuously. Because direction is not a one-time choice. It's a repeated commitment. Every day, every decision, every action. And this is where most people struggle. Because choosing direction requires clarity. And clarity requires honesty. You have to admit where you are, what's working, what's not, what needs to change. And that's uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It removes blame. It puts responsibility back on you. But that's also where your power is, because once you take responsibility, you gain control. And once you gain control, you can choose direction. Now here's something most people never realize. Direction simplifies everything. When you know where you're going, decisions become easier. You don't have to think as much. You don't have to debate as much. You don't have to second guess every move, because you have a filter, a simple question. Quote _26. That's it. And that question eliminates confusion. It removes distraction. It sharpens focus. Because suddenly, not everything deserves your attention. Not everything deserves your money. Not everything deserves your time. Now let's bring this back to wealth. Most people try to build wealth without defining what wealth means to them. So they chase numbers, chase income, chase status. But they never feel satisfied because they're moving without direction. The 1% define wealth differently, not just as money, but as structure, freedom, time, control. They know exactly what they're building. And because of that, they don't get distracted by things that don't matter. They don't chase every opportunity. They don't react to every trend. They stay aligned. That's the key word, alignment. Because when your actions align with your direction, you create momentum. And momentum builds confidence. Confidence builds consistency. Consistency builds results. And results reinforce your direction. That's the cycle the 1% live in. Not chaos, not reaction, but alignment. Now, here's a challenge for you. Strip everything away. The noise, the expectations, the comparisons. And ask yourself one question. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 27, underscore, underscore, not what you want to show, not what looks good. What are you building? Because until you answer that, every decision will feel uncertain. Every move will feel temporary. Every result will feel incomplete. But once you answer it, everything changes. Your focus sharpens. Your behavior stabilizes. Your patience strengthens. Because now, you're not just waiting. You're building with intention, with direction, with purpose. And that changes everything. Now here's where it gets deeper. Direction is not just about where you go. It's about what you ignore. Because every path requires sacrifice. Every decision requires exclusion. You cannot do everything. You cannot chase everything. You cannot become everything. And the faster you accept that, the stronger your direction becomes. The 1% are not successful because they do more. They're successful because they ignore more. They say no more often. They filter more aggressively. They protect their direction because they understand something powerful. Focus is not about what you do. It's about what you refuse to do. And that's where most people lose. They try to keep everything open, every option, every possibility, every distraction. And in doing so, they lose direction. Now let's connect this to your next step. You've seen the cycle. You've understood control. You've learned patience. And now, you're beginning to see direction. But there's one more layer, one that determines whether your direction actually leads to results. Because direction without action is just intention. And intention doesn't build anything. So the question becomes, how do you turn direction into consistent action? How do you build something that actually moves? That's where the next chapter begins. And it's where everything becomes real. Chapter 6. From intention to execution. There's a moment, quiet, almost invisible, where everything changes. It's the moment you stop thinking and start doing. Not once, not randomly, but consistently. Because here's the truth most people avoid. Knowing what to do has never been the problem. Doing it consistently is. You already know more than you use. You know you should save. You know you should invest. You know you should plan. But knowing without execution creates frustration because it builds awareness without results. And that gap between what you know and what you do is where most people stay stuck. Now, listen carefully. The 1% don't rely on motivation to close that gap. They rely on systems because motivation is temporary. It comes and goes. It rises when things feel good and disappears when things feel hard. But systems? Systems don't care how you feel. They run anyway. And that's why they work. Let's break this down. Imagine two people again. Both want to improve their finances. The first person says, quote, 28. The second person says, quote, 29. Same intention, different execution. The first relies on discipline. The second builds a system. And systems always win over willpower. Because willpower is limited. It fades throughout the day. It weakens under stress. It disappears when emotions rise. But systems remove the need for willpower. They make the right decision automatic. And that's how the 1% operate. They don't trust themselves to always feel motivated. They design their environment so they don't have to. Now here's the shift. Stop asking, quote 30. Start asking, underscore, quote, underscore 31, underscore, because the moment something becomes automatic, it becomes sustainable. And sustainability is what builds wealth. Now let's go deeper. Execution is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters, repeatedly. Because most people confuse activity with progress. They stay busy. They try many things. They move constantly. But they don't move forward. Why? Because their actions are scattered, unfocused, inconsistent. The 1% do fewer things. But they do them consistently, over time, without interruption. And that consistency compounds, just like money, just like habits, just like identity. Now, here's something powerful. Every action you repeat becomes a pattern. Every pattern you reinforce becomes your identity. And your identity determines your results. So when you execute consistently, you're not just building outcomes. You're building a version of yourself, a version that acts differently, thinks differently, decides differently. That's the real transformation. Now, let's make this practical. If you want to change your financial life, you don't need 10 new strategies. You need one that you actually follow consistently, without interruption, because consistency beats complexity every time. Now here's the part most people overlook. Execution requires simplicity. If your system is too complicated, you won't follow it. If your plan is too detailed, you'll abandon it. If your structure is too rigid, you'll break it. That's why the 1% keep things simple, clear, repeatable, sustainable. Because the simpler the system, the easier it is to follow. And the easier it is to follow, the more consistent you become. Now here's a question for you. What is one financial behavior you could repeat daily without fail? Not something extreme, not something perfect, something realistic. Because that's your starting point. That's your system. And once you build that, you expand gradually, intentionally, without overwhelming yourself. Now let's talk about resistance. Because no matter how simple your system is, you will feel resistance. You will feel the urge to skip, to delay, to ignore. That's normal. That's human. But here's the difference. Most people listen to that resistance. The 1% expect it. They don't negotiate with it. They don't debate it. They move anyway because they understand something critical. Consistency is not built when it's easy. It's built when it's uncomfortable. That's where it becomes real. That's where it becomes identity. Now let's connect everything. You have direction. You have patience. You're building control. Now you need execution. Because without execution, everything stays theoretical. Ideas without action are just potential. And potential doesn't pay. So the goal is simple. Turn your direction into daily action. Turn your action into consistent patterns. Turn your patterns into identity. And let that identity shape your future. Because once execution becomes who you are, you stop relying on effort. You start operating automatically. And that's when things accelerate, quietly, powerfully, predictably. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Once you build systems, once you execute consistently, once your identity begins to shift, you unlock something new, something most people never reach, leverage. Because the 1% don't just work harder. They build systems that work for them. And once you understand that, you stop trading time for money and start building something far more powerful, something that continues even when you stop. And that's where we go next. Chapter 7. Leverage, the silent multiplier. There is a moment in every journey when effort alone stops being enough. You can work harder, you can work longer, you can push yourself further, but eventually you hit a ceiling. Time. Because no matter how driven you are, your time is limited, and if your income depends only on your time, your growth will always be capped. This is where most people stay. Trading hours for money, energy for income, time for survival. And there's nothing wrong with starting there. But staying there, that's where the problem begins, because the 1% understands something most people ignore. You don't become wealthy by working more. You become wealthy by multiplying what you do. That multiplication is leverage. Now let's make this clear. Leverage is not a shortcut. It's not luck. It's not some hidden trick. It's a shift in how you think about effort. Instead of asking, quote underscore 32, you start asking, quote 33. That question changes everything, because now you're not just thinking about action. You're thinking about systems, structures, assets, things that continue even when you stop. Now, let's break it down. There are different forms of leverage. Time leverage, when other people's time contributes to your results. Skill leverage, when your knowledge creates value repeatedly. System leverage, when processes run without constant input. And asset leverage, when what you build produces continuously. The 1% don't rely on one. They combine them quietly, strategically over time. Now, here's the shift. Most people focus on earning. The 1% focus on building, because earning stops when you stop. But building continues. That's the difference. That's why some people work their entire lives and still depend on the next paycheck, while others build once and benefit for years. Now here's something important. Leverage doesn't start big. It starts small. A system you repeat, a process you refine, a decision you automate. And over time, those small systems stack. They connect. They expand. Until one day, you realize something has changed. You're no longer doing everything manually. Things are moving without constant effort. That's leverage. Now let's go deeper. Leverage requires a different mindset because it forces you to think long-term, to delay results, to invest effort up front for future return. And that's where most people struggle. Because leverage feels slow at first. It requires patience, it requires trust, it requires consistency. But once it's built, it accelerates everything. Let me give you a simple example. Two people earn the same income. The first spends everything they earn. The second builds something small. Maybe it's a skill, maybe it's a side system, maybe it's an investment. At first, there's no difference. Both live the same. Both earn the same. But over time, that small system begins to grow. Slowly, then steadily, then noticeably, until eventually it creates something new. Additional income, additional opportunities, additional freedom. That's leverage in motion. Now here's the key. Leverage is not about doing less. It's about doing things that last, that continue, that scale. Because the goal is not just to earn. It's to create something that earns without constant effort. Now, let's connect this to your life. Right now, how much of what you do continues without you? Think about that. Because if the answer is underscore, quote, underscore, 34, underscore, then everything depends on you, your time, your energy, your availability, and that's fragile. Because the moment you stop, everything stops. But when you build leverage, you create stability. because not everything depends on you anymore. Some things continue, some things grow, some things multiply, and that changes your entire relationship with money. Now, here's something powerful. Leverage creates freedom, not instant freedom, but gradual freedom. Because the more you build, the less you depend, the more systems you create, the more flexibility you gain, the more assets you develop, the more control you have. And control is the foundation of wealth. Now here's the challenge. Leverage requires a shift in thinking, from short-term to long-term, from effort to structure, from doing to building. And that shift is not easy, because it goes against everything you've been taught. Work harder, earn more, spend wisely. But the 1% adds something else. Build systems, create assets, think beyond today. And that's what changes everything. Now let's take this one step further, because once you understand leverage, once you start building systems, once things begin to move without constant effort, you face a new challenge, one that quietly determines whether your leverage grows or collapses. Because building is one thing, protecting is another. And the truth is, it's easier to build wealth than it is to keep it. And that's where we go next. If you like this audiobook, please give it a like. It will really help us promote the video. Chapter 8. Why most people lose what they build. There's a truth about wealth, quiet, uncomfortable, and rarely discussed. Building money is hard, but keeping it is harder, because earning requires effort, but keeping requires discipline, awareness, and restraint over time. And time exposes everything, habits, weaknesses, blind spots. That's why you see it happen again and again. People rise fast and fall faster. Athletes, entrepreneurs, creators, they earn millions and somehow lose it. Not because they forgot how to make money, but because they never learned how to protect it. And protection is a completely different skill. Now listen carefully. The 1% don't just focus on growth. They focus on preservation, because they understand something most people ignore. It's not what you make, it's what you keep. And what continues to grow, that's the real game. Now let's go deeper. Why do people lose wealth? Not because of one big mistake, but because of small, repeated behaviors, lifestyle inflation, emotional decisions, lack of structure, overconfidence. Each one seems harmless on its own, but together they slowly erode everything, like water wearing down stone, quietly, consistently, until one day there's nothing left. Now here's where it gets dangerous. Success can create illusion. The illusion that you, quote, 35, that you can't lose, that things will always work out. And that illusion leads to risk, unnecessary risk, emotional risk, uncalculated decisions. Because when you feel secure, you stop questioning, you stop checking, you stop protecting, and that's when mistakes happen. The 1% never fully relax their awareness, not out of fear, but out of respect for the process. Because they know wealth is not permanent. It's conditional. It depends on behavior, and behavior can change. Now, here's a shift that matters. Most people treat money as something to enjoy. The 1% treat money as something to manage, not because they don't enjoy life, but because they understand timing. They know when to enjoy and when to protect. That balance is what keeps them ahead. Now let's talk about lifestyle, because this is where most people lose control. They earn more and immediately upgrade everything. Bigger home, better car, more spending, and again. There's nothing wrong with improving your life. But here's the problem. They upgrade permanently based on temporary income, and that creates pressure because now they have to maintain that lifestyle no matter what, which means they can't slow down, they can't take risks, they can't adapt. They become trapped by the very success they created. The 1% move differently. They delay upgrades, they test stability, they make sure their systems can support their lifestyle before they expand it. Because they understand something powerful. Lifestyle should follow stability, not lead it. That's how you protect what you build. Now here's another layer. Protection is not just about spending. It's about awareness, knowing where your money is, knowing how it's working, knowing what could go wrong. Because risk doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, in overlooked details, in ignored patterns, in unchecked systems. And the moment you stop paying attention, you become vulnerable. The 1% stay aware, not obsessively, but consistently. They review, they adjust, they refine, because they know that protection is not a one-time action. It's an ongoing process. Now here's something deeper. Protection requires humility, the willingness to admit that things can go wrong, that you don't know everything, that you need structure, because overconfidence is one of the fastest ways to lose wealth. It blinds you, it removes caution, it creates unnecessary exposure, but humility keeps you grounded, it keeps you sharp, it keeps you protected. Now, let's connect this to you. If you started building wealth today, would you know how to protect it? Would you have systems in place? Would you have discipline? Would you have awareness? Because building without protection is temporary, and temporary success eventually disappears. But when you combine growth with protection, something powerful happens. Stability. And stability creates freedom. Because now, you're not just building, you're sustaining, and sustaining is what turns success into legacy. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Once you learn to build and protect, you unlock a new level. Because now, you're not just managing money, you're shaping your future, and that requires a different kind of thinking, a longer view, a deeper perspective, because the 1% don't think in months. They don't even think in years. They think in decades, and that shift changes everything. Chapter 9. Thinking in decades, not days. There is a shift, subtle, but life-changing, that separates those who build temporary success from those who build something that lasts. It's not about intelligence. It's not about opportunity. It's about time, perspective. Most people think in days. What do I need today? What do I want right now? What feels good in this moment? Some think in months. What can I achieve this year? How can I improve my situation? A few think in years. Where do I want to be in 5 years? But the 1%, they think in decades. And that changes everything. Because when you think in decades, your decisions slow down, not in action, but in intention. You stop reacting to short-term noise and start aligning with long-term outcomes. Now let's make this real. Imagine making a decision today, not based on how it affects your week or your year, but based on how it shapes your life 10 years from now. Suddenly, the unnecessary purchase feels smaller. The disciplined choice feels more powerful. The delay feels easier. Because your perspective has expanded, and perspective controls behavior. Now here's the truth most people never realize. Short-term thinking creates pressure. Long-term thinking creates clarity. Pressure makes you react. Clarity helps you decide. And the 1% live in clarity. They don't panic over small fluctuations. They don't chase every opportunity. They don't get distracted by trends because they're not trying to win today. They're building something that wins over time. Now, let's go deeper. When you think in decades, you begin to value different things. Consistency over intensity, stability over speed, structure over randomness. Because you understand something critical. What works over 10 years doesn't need to impress in 10 days. That's the mindset. And that's why the 1% don't get shaken easily. Markets change, trends shift, opportunities come and go. But their direction stays steady because it's not based on short-term conditions. It's based on long-term vision. Now here's where most people struggle. They want long-term results, but they make short-term decisions. They want stability, but they chase excitement. They want growth, but they avoid patience. And those contradictions keep them stuck because your results will always reflect your time frame. Short-term thinking creates short-term outcomes. Long-term thinking creates long-term results. It's that simple. Now, let's shift this into your life. Think about your financial decisions. How many are driven by the present moment, impulse, emotion, urgency? And how many are driven by the future, structure, planning, intentional growth? Because the more you shift toward the future, the more control you gain, and control is what creates stability. Now here's something powerful. When you think in decades, you stop needing instant validation. You stop needing quick wins. You stop measuring progress daily. Because you understand, real growth takes time. And that understanding creates patience, not forced patience, natural patience, the kind that comes from knowing you're on the right path. Now, here's a question for you. If you committed to one strategy, one system, one direction for the next 10 years, what would you choose? Not based on hype, not based on trends, based on sustainability, because that's the question the 1% ask. Not quote 36, but quote 37. And that question filters everything. Now let's go even deeper. Thinking in decades changes your identity because you stop seeing yourself as someone chasing results and start seeing yourself as someone building a legacy. And that shift is powerful because when you build for the long term, you act differently. You think differently. You decide differently. You stop cutting corners. You stop chasing shortcuts. You stop looking for easy wins because you understand there are none. Only consistent, intentional growth over time. Now here's the part most people don't expect. Thinking long-term actually makes you more present because you're no longer distracted by every small thing. You're focused, grounded, aligned. You know what matters and what doesn't. And that clarity reduces stress because now you're not reacting to everything. You're selecting what deserves your attention and ignoring the rest. That's power. Now let's connect this. You've built identity. You've broken the cycle. You've gained control. You've developed patience. You've found direction. You've created execution. You've started thinking in leverage. You've learned to protect. And now you're expanding your time frame from days to decades. But there's one more layer. Because even with long-term thinking, even with patience, even with structure, there is something that can still disrupt everything, something internal, something unpredictable, something powerful. your emotions. Because no matter how strong your plan is, if your emotions control your decisions, you will always be vulnerable. And that's where we go next, because mastering money requires mastering yourself. Chapter 10, Emotional Discipline, the Hidden Edge. There is a truth most people don't want to face. You are not controlled by your income. You are not limited by your opportunities. You are controlled by your reactions. And when it comes to money, your reactions matter more than your knowledge, because you can know exactly what to do and still do the opposite in a moment of emotion. That's the difference. That's why emotional discipline is one of the most valuable skills the 1% build. Not because they don't feel, but because they don't let feelings decide. Now pause for a second. Think about your last few financial decisions. Were they calm? Were they planned? Or were they influenced by how you felt in that moment? Stress, excitement, fear, pressure. Because emotions don't just affect your mood, they affect your judgment. And when judgment is compromised, decisions become expensive. Now here's the truth. Most people don't manage money. They manage how money makes them feel. And that difference is everything. Because if your decisions are based on emotion, they will always be inconsistent. And inconsistency destroys progress. Now let's break this down. There are 3 emotional traps that quietly control most financial decisions. The first is fear. Fear of losing money, fear of missing out, fear of not having enough. Fear makes you hesitate. It makes you pull back, even when you should move forward. It keeps you safe, but it also keeps you stuck. The second is excitement, the rush of opportunity, the thrill of something new, the promise of fast results. Excitement makes you act quickly. It removes caution. It pushes you into decisions before you fully understand them. And the third is comfort, the desire to feel good right now, to reward yourself, to escape pressure, to enjoy the moment. Comfort makes you spend. It justifies decisions that don't align with your future. And all 3, fear, excitement, comfort, create the same result, uncontrolled decisions. Now here's what the 1% do differently. They don't eliminate these emotions. They expect them, they prepare for them, and most importantly, they separate emotion from action. That's the key. They feel everything, but they don't act immediately. They pause. And that pause creates power, because in that moment, they shift from reaction to decision. Now let's go deeper. Emotional discipline is not about being cold. It's about being clear. Clear on your direction, clear on your goals, clear on your standards, because clarity gives you something to fall back on. When emotions rise, without clarity, emotion takes over, but with clarity, you have a filter, a structure, a way to decide, even when you don't feel like it. Now here's something powerful. Every time you resist an emotional decision, you strengthen your discipline. And every time you give in, you reinforce the pattern. That's how habits are built. Not in big moments, in small, repeated reactions. Now think about that. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you are not just saving money. You are reshaping your identity. You are becoming someone different, someone more controlled, more aware, more intentional. And that identity is what creates long-term results. Now let's make this practical. The next time you feel the urge to make a financial decision, pause just for a moment. Ask yourself, __quote_38 underscore underscore not what you want, not what you think, what you feel. Because naming the emotion creates distance. It breaks the automatic reaction. And in that space, you can choose. That's emotional discipline. Now here's the challenge. This is not easy because emotions are fast. They're automatic. They're powerful. But discipline is built slowly, through repetition, through awareness, through intentional action. And over time, it becomes natural. Now here's the reward. When you build emotional discipline, you stop making decisions you regret. You stop reacting to every situation. You stop losing progress to temporary feelings. And that creates stability, consistency, control. And those three things are the foundation of wealth. Now let's connect this. You've built structure. You've developed patience. You've created direction. You've learned execution. You've started building leverage. You've learned to protect. And now you're mastering emotion, because without emotional discipline, everything else becomes unstable. But with it, everything becomes stronger, more reliable, more predictable. And that's what the 1% build. Not perfection, stability. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because once you master your emotions, once your decisions become consistent, once your behavior aligns with your direction, you unlock something new. Clarity in opportunity. Because now you're not reacting to everything. You're selecting what matters. And that changes how you see the world. Because opportunities are everywhere. But most people don't see them. Not because they don't exist, but because their mind is too noisy, too reactive, too distracted. And that's where we go next. Because the next level of wealth is not just about control. It's about awareness. Chapter 11. Awareness. Seeing what others miss. There is something happening around you right now, every single day. Opportunities are moving, money is flowing, value is being created, and most people don't see any of it, not because it's hidden, but because their attention is somewhere else, distracted, reactive, overloaded. And when your mind is noisy, you miss what matters. That's why awareness is one of the most underrated advantages of the 1%. Because once you build control, once you master emotion, once you think long-term, your mind becomes quiet, clear, focused. And in that clarity, you start noticing things others ignore. Patterns, trends, shifts. You begin to see value before it becomes obvious. Now here's the truth. Opportunities don't appear suddenly. They become visible gradually, and only to those who are paying attention. Now think about that. How many opportunities have passed you? Not because you weren't capable, but because you weren't aware. Because you were busy reacting. Busy surviving. Busy distracted. That's the difference. The 1% don't just work harder, they see better. Now let's go deeper. Awareness is not luck. It's trained, built through observation, through curiosity, through slowing down enough to notice. Because when you slow down, you create space. And in that space, you begin to understand. Now here's something powerful. Most people consume information. The 1% study it. They don't just scroll. They analyze. They don't just listen. They question, because they're not looking for entertainment. They're looking for insight. And insight leads to opportunity. Now, let's make this practical. Instead of asking, quote, 39, start asking, quote, 40. Because real opportunities don't start loud. They start small, unnoticed, ignored, until they grow. And by the time they become obvious, it's often too late to benefit fully. That's why awareness matters, because it gives you timing, and timing multiplies results. Now here's another layer. Awareness requires detachment, the ability to step back, to observe without reacting, to see without immediately judging, because when you're emotionally involved, you lose clarity. But when you step back, you gain perspective, and perspective reveals patterns. Now think about money. Most people react to it, they feel it, they chase it, they fear it. But the 1% observe it, they study flows, they understand cycles, they notice behavior, because money leaves clues, always, but you have to be aware enough to see them. Now here's the shift. Instead of being inside the game, start observing the game. Watch how people spend. Watch how trends move. Watch how value is created. Because the more you observe, the more you understand. And the more you understand, the better your decisions become. Now here's something important. Awareness doesn't mean overthinking. It doesn't mean hesitation. It means clarity before action. Because once you see clearly, you can move confidently, without doubt, without confusion. Now let's connect this. You've built identity. You've broken cycles. You've gained control. You've developed patience. You've found direction. You've created execution. You've built leverage. You've learned protection. You've expanded your time frame. You've mastered emotion. And now you're developing awareness, because awareness is what ties everything together. It's what allows you to apply everything you've learned in the right moment, in the right way, at the right time. Now, here's where it gets even more powerful. Because once you become aware, once you start seeing patterns, once you understand how value moves, you unlock something new. Decision precision. You stop guessing. You stop hoping. You start choosing with clarity. And that changes everything, because the difference between success and struggle is not how many decisions you make. It's how accurate they are. And accuracy comes from awareness. Now here's the question. Are you paying attention? Not casually, not occasionally, but intentionally, because your future is being shaped by what you notice today and what you ignore. Now here's the next layer, because awareness shows you opportunities, but opportunity alone is not enough. You need something else, something most people lack, the ability to act when it matters, because seeing is one thing, moving is another, and the gap between the two is where most people hesitate. And hesitation is where opportunities disappear. So the next chapter is about something critical, something that determines whether your awareness turns into results or fades into missed chances. And that is decisive action. Friend, write your opinion on this topic in the comments. Do you agree with us or not? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Chapter 12, Decisive Action. Moving when it matters. There is a moment, small, quiet, almost easy to miss, where everything depends on one thing, not your knowledge, not your preparation, not even your awareness, your decision. Because you can see the opportunity, you can understand it, you can feel that it matters, and still do nothing. That's the gap, the space between seeing and acting. And most people live in that space, not because they're incapable, but because they hesitate, they overthink, they wait, they second guess. And while they're doing that, the moment passes. Now, listen carefully. Opportunities don't wait for certainty. They reward decision. That's the difference. That's why the 1% don't just see better. They move faster when it matters. Not recklessly, not emotionally, but decisively. Because they understand something critical. Perfect clarity never comes. There will always be unknowns. There will always be risk. There will always be doubt. And if you wait until everything feels certain, you will always be late. Now let's go deeper. Why do people hesitate? Not because they lack information, but because they fear making the wrong move. They want guarantees. They want safety. They want to avoid loss. But here's the truth. Avoiding decisions is a decision, and often it's the most expensive one, because while you're waiting, time moves, opportunities shift, and what could have been disappears. Now here's what the 1% do differently. They don't aim for perfect decisions. They aim for informed action. They gather enough clarity, and then they move, because they understand that progress comes from motion, not perfection. Now let's make this real. Imagine you see an opportunity. You've studied it. You understand it. It aligns with your direction. But you hesitate. You think, what if it doesn't work? What if I lose? What if I'm wrong? And those thoughts freeze you. Now imagine a different approach. You ask, what's the downside? What can I handle? What can I learn? And instead of focusing on fear, you focus on growth. That shift turns hesitation into action. Now here's something powerful. Decisive action builds confidence, not before you act, but after. Because confidence is not a prerequisite, it's a result. Every time you act, you prove something to yourself, that you can move, that you can handle outcomes, that you can adapt, and that builds trust in yourself. And that trust makes the next decision easier. Now let's talk about timing, because decisive action is not about speed alone. It's about recognizing the right moment and moving within it. Not too early, not too late, but when it matters. And that's where awareness connects with action. You see the pattern, you understand the shift, and then you move. That's precision. Now, here's the challenge. Most people wait for external validation. They want someone to confirm their decision, to approve it, to guarantee it. But the 1% don't rely on that. They trust their process, their thinking, their preparation, and then they take responsibility, because every decision has an outcome, good or bad, and they accept both. That's maturity. That's control. Now here's something deeper. Decisive action is not about always being right. It's about always moving forward, because even when you're wrong, you gain something. Experience, clarity, understanding, and those lessons improve your next decision. But if you never act, you never learn. And without learning, you stay stuck. Now let's connect this to your journey. You've built awareness. You can see more clearly. You understand patterns. You recognize opportunities. But none of that matters if you don't move, because potential without action remains potential. And potential does not change your life. Now here's a question. What decision have you been delaying? Not because you don't understand it, but because you're waiting to feel ready. Because that's the one that matters. That's the one that's holding you in place, and the moment you act on it, everything shifts. Momentum begins, clarity increases, confidence builds, because action creates energy, and energy drives progress. Now here's the final layer. Decisive action must be consistent, not one big move, not one bold step, but repeated decisions, aligned with your direction over time. Because one decision can start the change, but consistency sustains it. Now let's move forward. You can see, you can act, you can build, but there's something else, something subtle, that determines how far you go. Not your decisions, not your systems, not even your discipline, your environment. Because whether you realize it or not, your surroundings are shaping you, influencing you, guiding your behavior. And if you don't control your environment, it will control you. And that's where we go next. Chapter 13, Your Environment is Programming You. There is something shaping your decisions right now, quietly, constantly, and most people never question it. Your environment. Not just where you live, but what you see, what you hear, who you're around, what you consume every single day. Because whether you realize it or not, your environment is programming your behavior, and your behavior is shaping your results. Now pause. Think about your daily life, the conversations you hear, the content you consume, the habits you're surrounded by. Are they pushing you forward or keeping you where you are? Because here's the truth. You don't rise above your environment easily. You adapt to it. You absorb it. You normalize it. And over time, you become it. That's why the 1% are extremely intentional about what surrounds them. Not because they're avoiding reality, but because they understand influence. Now let's go deeper. Most people try to change their outcomes without changing their environment. They want better habits, but stay in the same patterns. They want discipline, but stay in distracting spaces. They want growth, but stay around stagnant thinking. And that creates friction, because your environment pulls you one way, while your goals push you another, and eventually, the stronger force wins. That's why change feels hard, not because you're weak, but because your environment is stronger than your intention. Now here's the shift. Instead of fighting your environment, start designing it. Because when your environment supports your goals, everything becomes easier. Habits stick, focus improves, decisions become clearer. Now let's make this practical. If you want to build wealth, what are you constantly exposed to? Content that promotes spending? Conversations that normalize limitation? People who react instead of plan? Or information that builds awareness? People who think long-term? Systems that encourage discipline? Because what you see repeatedly becomes what you believe. And what you believe shapes what you do. Now, here's something powerful. The 1% don't rely on willpower alone. They reduce friction. They remove distractions. They place themselves in environments where the right behavior becomes natural. That's strategy. Because it's easier to act right when everything around you supports it. Now think about this. If your phone constantly pulls your attention, your focus will suffer. If your circle normalizes poor decisions, your standards will drop. If your environment rewards comfort, your discipline will weaken. That's influence. And it's constant. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. You cannot grow while staying fully comfortable in the same environment. Something has to change, either the environment or your exposure to it, because growth requires separation, not isolation, but intentional distance from what slows you down. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, how can I stay disciplined? Start asking, what is making discipline harder than it needs to be? Because once you remove that friction, everything changes. Now let's go deeper. Your environment is not just physical, it's mental. What you consume, what you watch, what you listen to, because information is influence, and influence shapes perception. If you constantly consume noise, your thinking becomes scattered. If you consume clarity, your thinking sharpens. That's why the 1% are selective. They don't absorb everything. They filter. They choose. Because they understand what enters your mind eventually shapes your life. Now here's a question. If someone observed your environment, your habits, your inputs, would they predict your future accurately? Because your environment is a blueprint. It reveals direction. Now here's the next layer. Your environment doesn't just influence you, it reinforces you. It makes certain behaviors easier and others harder. So if you want to change your life, don't just change your goals. Change your surroundings. Because once your environment aligns with your direction, progress becomes natural. Not forced, not exhausting, sustainable. Now let's connect this. You've built awareness. You've learned to act. You've developed discipline. Now you're shaping your environment, because that's what allows everything else to stick. Now here's where it gets even more powerful. Because once your environment supports you, once your actions become consistent, once your identity stabilizes, you begin to notice something. Your circle starts to matter more, because the people around you are part of your environment, and they influence you more than anything else. And that's where we go next. Because who you surround yourself with can accelerate your growth or quietly destroy it. Chapter 14, The Power of Your Circle. There is a force, subtle, constant, and incredibly powerful, that shapes your thinking, your standards, and your future without ever asking for permission. The people around you, not just the ones you talk to every day, but the ones you listen to, observe, and allow to influence your decisions. Because whether you realize it or not, your circle is setting your ceiling. Now pause for a moment. Think about the 5 people you spend the most time with. What do they talk about? Do they focus on growth or problems? Do they think long-term or react to the moment? Do they build or complain? Because over time, you begin to mirror them, not intentionally, but naturally. That's how influence works. Now here's the truth most people avoid. You don't just choose your circle. Your circle chooses your direction, because it shapes what feels normal. And what feels normal determines what you accept. Now let's go deeper. If everyone around you is comfortable with average, you will start to feel uncomfortable aiming higher. If everyone reacts emotionally, you will start reacting too. If everyone avoids discipline, you will start negotiating with it. That's the pattern. That's the influence, and it's powerful. Now here's what the 1% understand. They don't just focus on what they do. They focus on who they are around, because they know something critical. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your environment and your circle. And your circle is one of the strongest parts of that environment. Now, this doesn't mean you abandon people. It means you become intentional about who influences you, about whose voice you allow into your thinking. Because influence is not neutral. It either builds you or limits you. Now, here's the truth. You don't need to be extraordinary. You need to be consistent. Because consistency creates identity. Identity creates results. And results create the life you're building. Now, here's the final message. Everything you've heard comes down to this. You are one decision away, from changing your trajectory, not your entire life in one moment, but your direction. And direction is everything. Because once you change direction, time does the rest. Now, before this ends, there's something important. If something in this audiobook resonated with you, don't just move on. Pause, decide, and act. And if one line stayed with you, one idea shifted your thinking, one moment made you reflect, carry it forward, because that's how change spreads. Now here's your moment. If you're serious about applying this, make it real. Commit to one standard, one system, one improvement, and stick to it, because that's your starting point. And if this journey added value to your thinking, then make it visible, not for approval, but as a contract with yourself. Hit like, not as a click, but as a decision. Share in the comments what you're committing to, so it becomes real. And subscribe, not for content, but for consistency, for accountability, for growth. Because this is not just a video. This is a shift. And shifts only matter when you act on them. Now carry this with you, not as motivation, but as direction. Because motivation fades, but direction builds everything. And here's the line I want to leave you with. Your future is not built by what you dream about. It is built by what you do, repeatedly, starting now.